The ICT KillZones Hunt Indicator is specifically designed for the ICT style and is available on various platforms on the TradingFinder website. From this section, you can access the indicator on the TradingView website. Traders can also visit this page to learn how the indicator works. To access the indicator on the TradingView site, search for the indicator name in the Indicators section, and click on the indicator to run it on the chart. For more convenient and easier access between indicators, add them to your indicators by enabling the Add to Favorites option. The ICT KillZones Hunt Indicator is a special tool and a workbench for ICT-style traders to easily identify session, show, areas, and kill zones on the chart. This indicator also identifies the FVG, fair value, gap ranges, and order block areas, showing traders high importance zones so they can conduct more specific analyses on the chart. At the start of the session, the indicator starts drawing the high and low ranges of the session, which are displayed as dotted lines at the top and bottom and mark the kill zone area with a colored box. Kill zone areas are part of the limits of each session are formed in a time frame. The kill zone areas of the booklet are the most important time frames of each day. Due to the high trading volume and market volatility in these areas, they are recognized as highly important time frames. Block orders and IFVs that form in the kill zone areas of the booklet. There are important areas that when the price reaches these areas, we may be reacting to these areas. For example, here, the London session has formed and the kill zone area has been identified in this area. As the London session begins, we see the price moving downward, creating the low of the London session. After that, an upward order block is identified, and then the price moves upward, forming two fair value gaps in this area. In the order block area, we see that the price moved upwards and after a pullback to the Saudi order block area, it moved upwards, strongly in a sharp move. Here, an upward FVG, fair value gap, has been identified and the price has pulled back to this area, testing it, and we can see that it has continued its upward trend again. We can give other examples here within the limits of a New York session. Specifically in the kill zone of the New York morning, where a bearish order block and a bearish fair value gap have been identified, and we can see that the price has moved downward. It has formed the bottom of the New York session area and continued its bearish trend with a pullback towards the bearish fair value gap. In the settings section, in the input section, there are options for us. In the first section, you can enable or disable the display of all order blocks. If you disable this option, only the most recent order blocks will be identified and displayed on the chart. In the next section, you can enable or disable the display of all variables. If this option is disabled, only the most recently identified variables will be displayed on the chart. In the next section, you can enable or disable the status of this formation for each session. If you enable this option, you can see the volume of each session, the amount of time each kill zone has been open, the number of candles formed in each kill zone, along with the volume of each kill zone or session in this section. In the next section, you can set the order block identification period, which is set to 3 by default. The higher you set this value, the longer-term order blocks will be identified, and the lower you set it, the shorter-term order blocks will be identified. In the next section, you can set the duration for how long an order block remains valid, which is set to 500 candles by default, and you can adjust this value to be higher or lower. You can set the mitigation order block level in this section, which is divided into three modes: proximal, 50% OB, and distal. If you select proximal mode, it considers the closest order block level to the price, and if the price reaches the order block range, it considers the range as mitigation. If you select 50% OB mode, it considers the 50% order block level, and if the price reaches the 50% order block range, it considers the order block range as mitigation. And by selecting the distal mode, the farthest level of the order block is considered to be the price, and if the price reaches the farthest level of the order block, it is identified as mitigation, in a way that occurs with the consumption of the entire order block. In the next section, you can enable or disable the display or non-display of the order blocks of the reserve along with the supply order blocks. You can change the color of each of the order blocks to your preferred color. In the next section, you can enable or disable the identification of demand order blocks and supply order blocks, and here you can choose between two modes, defensive and aggressive, depending on which option you select. The limits of the order blocks will adjust according to each trader's strategy, considering larger or smaller ranges. Each trader can adjust their strategy system and consider larger or smaller ranges for display. In the next section, you can determine the duration of the FVG ranges, which is set to 500 candles by default. In the next section, you can set the FVG mitigation level. In this section, which is limited to proximal, 50% OB, and distal, you can enable or disable the display status of the FVGs for the purchase and sale, along with the color of your choice. In the next section, you can enable the FVG filter, which if enabled. In this section, you can consider filters for FVG that are grouped into four modes: very aggressive, aggressive defensive, and very defensive. If you select very aggressive mode, it will identify lower quality FVGs and display them on the chart. If you choose the aggressive mode, it will consider more filters, like larger FVG candle bodies. In the defensive mode, it identifies fewer FVGs. And with the very defensive mode, the default, fewer higher quality FVG ranges are shown. In defensive mode, all three candles must be bearish FVGs with large bodies and small wicks. Next, set the session info color to your preference. Choose to show or hide the Asia session and high. They have high quality. For example, when selecting the defensive mode, all three candles must be bearish FVG candles with large bodies and very small wicks relative to the body. In the next section, you can determine the color of the session information, which will change to your preferred color here. You can also choose whether to display or hide the Asia session along with the Asia high, as well as the London session and the London high. You can also choose whether to display or hide the New York morning session along with the New York morning high, and finally, whether to display or hide the New York afternoon session along with the New York afternoon high. You can choose whether or not to display the Asia session along with the Asia Hillsong B along with the color. The status of displaying or not displaying the London session along with the London calzone. The status of displaying or not displaying the New York morning calzone along with the New York morning session. And finally, the status of displaying or not displaying the New York afternoon calzone along with the New York afternoon session. For example, here, if I disable the New York soup session, the calzone area will also be disabled for me and will not be displayed. If I disable the calzone mode, the entire session area will be identified and visible to me. To prevent overlapping between the high zones and the sessions, this feature is available so that the high zones are displayed with boxes, and the session areas are shown with dotted lines. In the next section, you can enable or disable different alerts. In the first section, you can have alerts sent to you if the Saka and cuff stations are blocked, or you can disable or enable this section. In the next section, you can enable or disable alerts if the order block is mitigated. In the next section, you can enable or disable the status of sending a happy message in case of Urza's order block mitigation. You can enable or disable the status of sending a happy message in case of the Tagazab FVG mitigation, along with Urza's FVG. In the next section, you can set the frequency message, which is categorized into all once old bar and old bar close. By selecting the all mode, you will receive a message in all cases. By selecting the once old bar option, you will receive a message while the candle has not yet closed. And by selecting the once per bar close option, alerts will only be sent if the candle closes. In the next section, you can set the alert sending based on UTC time, and in the last part, you can enable or disable the display of the info settings. Well, friends, we've reached the end of this indicator tutorial. We would be happy if you share your comments and suggestions with us in the comments section.